What's up, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new episode here at Eisei-En. I figured it's about time to do our annual spring walkthrough of the nursery and show you some of the new projects that we have going on at the garden right now. We've just finished up with repotting. Everything's back up on the benches. We're finally past the danger of frost and everything's looking really good. So I want to share what our springtime is like here at the nursery. So without further ado, let's head into the front gate here and check out some of the trees. So first up on the list here is this Rocky Mountain Juniper that's grafted with Itoigawa foliage and planted on a piece of driftwood. Now this particular tree here is actually the first tree that I ever scion grafted years and years ago. I was actually living in Japan at the time and came back for a visit and decided to change out the foliage on the plant. We actually planted this tree on this piece of driftwood recently in an episode of BONSAI-U on our learning platform. So if you're interested in seeing how that whole process is put together and developed, you can go check that out via the link down below. But I want to show you the deadwood up close here. You can see just how striated and beautiful it is. We've got some azaleas that are planted on there as well. And then the Rocky Mountain Juniper grafted with Itoigawa foliage is leaning off to the side. So one of my favorite projects that we've done recently here at the nursery. Now if we take a look down here, we've got some shohin projects going on. For those of you guys who've been following our channel for a while here on YouTube, you'll know that we mainly work with large trees, but we do have a lot of shohin trees as well. So we've got on the left side there an Itoigawa Shimpaku. We've got in the back a gardenia. And then in the front here, we have a really nice little, very small trident maple root over rock. So this tree will be featured in the U.S. National Show in an upcoming event here in not too long. We just want to work on the ramification a little bit more and develop it out a little bit further. Now, those little tea bags that are on the soil surface right there, those are filled with fertilizer. They're relatively low nitrogen, so we're not trying to push a lot of growth at this point. We just want the tree to flush out nicely and then work on that ramification this year. All right, next up here is a Japanese maple clump. This was actually put together by my dad in a workshop with Bill Valvanis of International Bonsai, I'd say close to 20 years ago at this point. So if you look down at the base here, you can see just how beautiful the trunks intertwine with one another. And you can see the beautiful small leaves starting to emerge at this time of year. This is one of my favorite trees in the nursery right now. And, just having Japanese maples like this in the garden is really awesome this time of year. Seeing the fluorescent greens and reds and pinks come out in the spring makes the garden really lively and beautiful. Now here we've got two fantastic Japanese black pines. The one on the left is formerly a shohin tree. It's actually grown out a little bit and is now what I would consider to be a kifu size plant, which is one size up. But it has an amazing trunk that's completely covered in lichen. If we zoom in here, you can see all those lichen across the trunk. It's absolutely beautiful. Then we zoom out here a little bit and you can see the structure of the plant needs a little bit of work, but this year once we decandle it, we'll get twice as much ramification by the time we come to fall. So the tree is going to look twice as dense and be twice as beautiful at that point. The tree next to it here is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, medium-sized Japanese black pine in the United States at the moment. It's probably hard to tell in the video, but the trunk is absolutely incredible. The way that it tapers with that huge wide nabari all the way up to a very thin, very small apex there that then flushes out and gives you this really nice big broad canopy. So one of my favorite trees in the nursery, and as a matter of fact, this tree will be displayed with that little trident maple shohin root over rock that we just mentioned a minute ago at an upcoming national exhibition. If we walk around the corner here, you can see this is one of our larger junipers that we currently have at the nursery. This was featured in a recent episode of BONSAI-U as well. And actually we put that episode up on YouTube, so you can go check it out. We repotted this tree from a much larger container into this smaller square container. And at the moment, it's just a giant bush, but we will be pruning this tree up in an upcoming episode here shortly. But I do want to show you the trunk here. You can see just how beautiful that deadwood is. This was all carved by Masahiko Kimura in Japan a number of years ago, and then the tree was imported to the United States. Next up here is a really beautiful American hornbeam forest. This was also put together by my dad in a workshop with Bill Valvanis nearly 20 years ago. All of these were tiny little seedlings at that point, and this tree has been completely developed by my dad through sort of clip and grow techniques, and now we're maintaining it here at the nursery for him. But you can see just how nice the trunks interplay with one another. They're all perfectly placed. You can see all of them from the front view. And then there's perfect balance in terms of the diameters of those trunks and the heights of those trunks as we move further back here. So very excited to have this at the nursery going forward. So as you guys visit the garden in the future, this will permanently be here. So you'll definitely see this on the benches at some point. All right, next up here is a huge Arakawa Japanese maple. It's actually so big it's hard to get it in frame entirely here. But you can see just how much ramification and how beautiful the foliage is this time of year. And the bark characteristics down below are really, really beautiful here. So let's see if we can get it to focus there. Now you can see just how gnarly that bark is. This tree was actually an air layer off of a larger plant at Brussels Bonsai Nursery. The air layer was probably done 20, 25 years ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. And now we're maintaining it for a student here at Eisei-En. All right, around the corner here, we've got some coniferous projects on this bench right here. So first up is a Kishu Shimpaku juniper that was grafted with Itoigawa foliage. I actually grafted this tree maybe 5 or 6 years ago using approach grafting techniques for a video that I did with Bonsai Empire as part of our advanced series on their website. You can see that all of those grafts did in fact take very nicely here and have started to fill in really, really well. And we still have a little bit of the original Kishu foliage up here at the top, but eventually we'll remove that and turn those into a jin feature. So it will be what's called a tenjin or an apricot jin on the tree. But the tree has a lot of really interesting characteristics that may be a little difficult to see in the video, but you can see the interplay of the live vein and the deadwood there. The tree has many eda jin, which are jins with live tissue running down them. So relatively rare characteristics, and this tree is chock full of them. Next up, we've got a Hinoki Cypress forest here. So this is one that we put together this spring in one of our intensive classes here at the nursery. So it's still a little bit unkempt. It's not fully wired out and hasn't been pruned back quite yet, but the structure is there for a really good setup in the long run. So excited to see how this develops over the next few years. Next up, we have a really beautiful Itoigawa Shimpaku. This is actually a tree that was collected in the mountains of Japan years and years ago and was imported to the United States by a client of ours here at Eisei-En back in the early 2000s. He's been developing it for a number of years, and a few years ago it ended up getting slightly weakened due to a repotting issue. So the tree was brought here last year. We styled it up, repotted it this spring, and it's really starting to flush out nicely. So very excited to see this tree develop over the next couple of years here at the nursery. But I want to show you just how nice this trunk is here. The interplay of the deadwood and the live vein are absolutely incredible. Next up is a Kokonoi Japanese white pine planted on a piece of lace rock here. This is another one that we recently did for an episode of BONSAI-U, where we took this tree that was essentially at death's door. It had been imported and bare rooted and completely weakened over the last few years and was nearly on its way out. We rescued it, took it out of its pot, worked the roots back, and then placed the tree on this stone. So very excited to see this develop. It's got a very naturalistic look. It may be hard to tell in the video here, but in person, it's very beautiful. It looks like a tree that, you know, would be sort of on a cliffside or next to the ocean, for example, along the coastline of Japan. So again, very excited to see how this develops over the next couple of years. Right against the fence here, we've got several trees that are in various stages of development. The first one here is a very large Hinoki Cypress. This was actually a field-grown tree. It was grown up in Long Island by a wholesale grower, not for bonsai necessarily, but for landscaping. We took this tree out of the ground. It was balled and burlapped, and then styled it up and put it in this pot this spring. So from the time that the tree was collected out of the ground to what you see right here is only 3 years at this point. So very, very quick turnaround when you're dealing with Hinoki, particularly if you're applying proper techniques to these trees. So over here we've got quite a few deciduous projects that we're working on at the moment. You can see a couple of Japanese maples here. The one on the right hand side is particularly nice. This is an imported tree from Japan, and you can see that at the very base of this tree it's actually a root over rock. Now the trunks are a little bit straight on this plant. It's not something that we can really contend with when the tree is this old, but with the full canopy here, it's relatively well hidden. And even in the winter, the ramification sort of offsets the fact that those trunks are very straight. So fantastic tree with a fantastic future. Now this little Itoigawa right here is really special. It won the medium-size award at the US National Show a number of years ago and has been maintained by the same owner for the last few years. So it was brought here this spring for us to repot and then get it back in good shape. But one thing to note here is that this tree has no wire on it at all. All of these pads are fully set. So it has really that feeling of mochikomi, meaning that it's sort of settled into position and just looks like it's been in a pot for a very long time, which in fact it has. Next up here we have what's called a Seiyu Japanese maple. Seiyu translates to blue dragon. This is a cut leaf Japanese maple that was grown from a piece of nursery stock. It was actually picked up by my dad again at a nursery not far from his home in Knoxville, Tennessee, probably close to 20 years ago. It was less than the diameter of a pencil at that point, but you can see at this stage it's got a really nice nabari down here. The trunk has some really beautiful striations as well, and then the foliage has this gorgeous fluorescent green color this time of year. So one of those trees in the nursery in the spring that just really make the garden pop. So as we make our way into the middle garden here, this is where we have a lot of projects that are in mid stages of development. So for example, this Rocky Mountain Juniper here is currently being grafted with Itoigawa foliage. You can see we're doing the approach graft method here. So all of these pots with Itoigawa still have their root systems intact, and we will be separating those root systems a little bit later this year and eventually removing all of this Rocky Mountain Juniper foliage at the top and building out a much more compact and, in my opinion, interesting looking tree. We also have some interesting one-seed junipers in the nursery. This is a tree that was brought here by one of our students in the intensive classes. We actually completely changed the planting angle. You can see the pot is a little bit strange for the tree because the tree originally was more upright, and this spring we leaned it over. So this mass of sphagnum moss off to the side right here, this was actually the root system that was buried underneath the soil prior to repotting it on this new angle, and now it's humped up at the moment. So over time we'll be able to work that down a little bit and get this in a much smaller container, but very excited about the future of this tree as well. I also have a lot of raw material here that was recently repotted into ceramic containers. So for example, this Rocky Mountain Juniper here, you can see how amazing the trunk is on this tree. This was in a wooden box up until just about 2 weeks ago when we potted it in the ceramic pot. The goal is to get this tree in very, very good health this year, style it up this fall, and then come springtime next year, actually find a really nice piece of driftwood to plant this tree on as well. So again, the goal with this one is to put it in the national show at some point. This is another spectacular Rocky Mountain Juniper that we have here at the nursery. This is one that was collected by the guys at Backcountry Bonsai a couple of years ago, and we've been working on it here over the last few months to get it in good health and show off the bark characteristics and the deadwood as well. So you can see there's a really nice interplay and really great striations of that deadwood, and this tree actually has fantastic foliage for a Rocky Mountain juniper, which is why we are not going to be grafting this tree. We're going to keep this original foliage on here. So back in this area, we've got a lot of trees that are, again, in various stages of development, both deciduous and coniferous material. So this particular tree right here is an American beech that was collected by a friend of the garden, Matt Smith, over near Memphis, Tennessee, a number of years ago, and trunk chopped. So this spring, we wired it up and then took this from what essentially was a, I think, 40 or 50 gallon pot down into this very small, very shallow Canton pot. Now, I was a little bit worried about it because we took so many roots off, but as you can see, the buds have already started to move and open on this tree. So there is no problem with the health of the plant. It's going to flush out beautifully, and I'm very excited to see where this goes this year. So this is a tree that many of you guys will recognize. We featured this tree on YouTube here a couple of years ago in an episode of BONSAI-U. This is the Japanese maple clump that I put together from seedlings when I was about 16 years old. So you can see just how beautifully the trunks have fused down here. I don't know if that video is focusing properly or not, but you can see just how beautiful the canopy is on this tree as well at this point. It's fully flushed out. And as a matter of fact, this was one of the first maples this year to really start pushing bud and flushing out. So the first flush is actually almost completely hardened off, and we're getting ready to do leaf cutting and leaf removal on this plant coming up here shortly. So this is also another tree that many of you guys might recognize here. This is a flowering apricot that we featured on a BONSAI-U episode on here on YouTube a few years back. It's in a completely different pot at this point. This pot was made by Patrick Luthi from Fukudo Ceramics in Switzerland. But as you can see, the tree has put on a tremendous amount of foliage and ramified really beautifully since we put out that video. So we'll do an update video on this at some point in the near future here. So be on the lookout for that. Now down here in our lower garden, you can see we've already got the shade cloth out on some of the structures down here. And that is because the trees that are being maintained under here are a lot of our junipers and pines that were grafted either last fall or in late winter going into early spring this year. So I want to make sure that those grafts don't desiccate, so that's why we're keeping them under this shade cloth here for now. So this guy right here is a Ponderosa pine that has been grafted with Japanese black pine. So I'll show you some of the foliage here that started to take. These are grafts that were done a couple of years ago, and then of course we've got new grafts that we've added on here as well. Majority of the trees in here are, though, in fact, Rocky Mountain junipers that have very poor foliage on them, and we're changing those out. Now this tree right here is one that you'll also recognize. I featured this in various BONSAI-U episodes and on YouTube here as well, and on Instagram too. This is a tree that I put in the US National last year, and it had a very good showing at that show, but the foliage on this plant is very, very difficult to work with. So I decided this year to switch it out to Itoigawa. So managed to put, I think, about 25 to 30 grafts on this tree. So hopefully some of these will take this year. I think a majority of them should take, and we should be able to switch out the foliage entirely within, say, probably 3 years from now. So again, this is going to be a plant that is going to totally transform with the new foliage, and very excited to see what it looks like when it does completely get its clothes changed. And that's what's referred to as koromogai in Japanese, changing of the clothes, when you actually change the foliage on a tree like this. So again, I think you're going to see a lot of this tree in the future. So in addition to the work that we do with conifers here, we also do a lot of work with deciduous material, long-term development projects like these maples here. We've got trident maples and Shishigashira maples mixed in the group here. You can see all of these trees are in custom-built wooden boxes at the moment. The roots on these plants have been treated with something called the Ebihara technique, where we actually nail the tree to the bottom of the pot and then nail all of the roots out across the base of the pot so that we can control exactly where the surface root structure grows. So these trees are a couple of years into this process here, and the roots are already starting to look fantastic. So coming up here, we're going to be working more and more on the branch structures of these trees, so they won't look so much like sticks and pots. But these are plants that at some point in the future you will see in exhibitions around the United States. They may not look like it now, but they've got a good future. Now over here, we're growing out a lot of Japanese black pines for Shohin bonsai and exposed root bonsai. So again, these don't look like much. They're just little seedlings at this point, but many of these have been twisted up and actually have very gnarly and interesting trunks. And we're very heavily fertilizing these guys this year with Osmocote Plus here to try to blow up the size of the trunks as much as possible. So it looks excessive, and really it is in terms of the amount that we put on here. But again, the goal is to put on a lot of tissue very quickly this spring, and then we'll start the decandling process this summer with these guys so we can develop both the thickening and the ramification at the same time. And these are all techniques, again, that we cover a lot in Bonsai-U, so definitely check out the link in the description down below to learn more about that. And last but not least, no video here at Eisei-En would be complete without showing you guys the monster 1-seed juniper down here in the lower garden. So for those of you guys who have been following our channel for a long time, you'll remember this tree from a number of years ago. We did an initial styling probably about three and a half years ago at this point. And then in the spring of 2020, we repotted this tree in an episode here on Bonsai-U and on YouTube. So we actually built a gantry crane above this guy, hoisted it up, and then lowered it down into this ceramic pot here. And the tree, of course, did survive that process, and we turned the gantry crane into this nice little arbor here that's now being covered with wisteria. But the tree was then subsequently restyled again this winter, and you can see it actually has a nice padded appearance to it at this point. So I'm excited to develop this tree over this year. By the time we get to fall of this year, we should have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3 times the amount of foliar density that you see on the plant right now. All right, thank you guys so much for checking out this episode here at Eisei-En. I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the current projects that we have going on here at the garden. You know, things are always shifting and changing here. We're always getting new plants in. Students are bringing stuff in. Clients are bringing trees in. Trees are being purchased and moved out. So the benches are always transforming here at the nursery. But it's always fun to show you guys in the current moment as like a snapshot in time what we're doing here at the garden. So once again, thank you guys so much for checking out this episode, and look forward to seeing you guys next time around. Until then, take care.